Okay, what to do without the Time Splitters review? I still need to get a new PS2 in order to actually play it. So what should I work on in the Vlad, you got something to say?
Well, you've got a problem, and I got a solution. I'm gonna create the game. I'm gonna make the best game ever.
Normally I wouldn't even bother to consider this, but now I'm curious in how you're going to create this game. So give me a game to review, Vlad. Let's see what you got.
Well, first we take Resident Evil 4. It's a good basis for everything that I want to do, and it's scary. And who doesn't like scary? Heh.
Alright, Resident Evil 2 Remake is a good base, especially if I wanted to play a survival horror, which I've been in the mood for lately. What else you got?
Next, we had Dead Space. It's spooky, there's a really interesting monsters and interesting mechanics, that whole stasis thing. Yeah!
I mean, not bad in terms of Dead Space 2, a little bit repetitive with Resident Evil 2, but you know what? They have their distinct flavors, and I could see them combining well. Alright, what else?
Next, an indie. You love indies, so Mudan. It's a little bit off, a little bit weird, a little bit different. Yeah, that's great!
An interesting choice, but honestly, I'm sort of surprised you chose that one. It is a good choice. Mundan is that tension-filled game that never leaves you able to, calm yourself, and that would work perfect in a survival horror. It's a little bit out there, but yeah, sure.
We gotta finish with something you've always talked about too much. The Quiet Man. You love The Quiet Man, right?
What? No, don't put it in! What the hell did you create?
Yeah, you know that I have things to say when you get a real-life segment to start the review. Or a Vlad segment. Are they the same thing? Regardless, in an industry that is constantly influenced by the biggest hits and trends within itself, just see the number of Vampire Survivor clones released in the last year, there's still usually a line where that stops, or a line where a smaller team can only push the game to. See something like the Dark Souls series. There's plenty of games from smaller teams that mimic the look and feel of that series, but many of them can't approach the level of storytelling and interconnectedness that the main Souls series has. They just don't have the bandwidth. Not even mentioning the graphical fidelity and the different platforms that the game is coming out on. So when coming across Daymare 1994 Sandcastle on the Steam store, while looking for games to cover and stream on Twitch, with a $29.99 price tag, I admit, I was a little skeptical. There were inconsistencies even from the start, like how the game was advertised on Google being on the PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox Series, and the Nintendo Switch, and yet I couldn't find it on the Nintendo store, but it was on the PlayStation store, and the game's trailer did seem to have some life to it. I mean, this is what the channel is about, being the medium to show you games that you may have questions on, may not want to drop money on yourself, and telling you whether or not it's worth your time and money. So I went in thinking I'd stream the game, make a first impressions, and try to match the game to the type of player who may like that type of game. What I didn't expect is the roller coaster that the game would take me on, and how hard it tests my reviewing chops. Don't get me wrong, you may see the mixed rating on Steam right now with over 200 reviews and immediately write it off. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because Daymare, when hitting on all of its cylinders, can mirror some of the biggest hitters in the genre, and I'm talking about games like Resident Evil 2 Remake and the Dead Space Remake. Yes, it can stand with them in some aspects. But in the same breath, it can lead to moments like these. Why did I go there? Oh, God. come on, that went through his chest.
How? Who grabbed me? Was it him?
Yep, and that big thing was bullshit. Bullshit and bullshit accessories.
So yeah, this is a review, but this is going to also be a form of therapy for me. You see the time length of this review. So for those who really just want the buyability score, here you go. It's just on the edge with an 80, making it a solid buy unless you're hurting for cash. But you're going to need to jump to this timestamp if you want the enhancers. And like the game, just giving you those numbers won't let you experience the ups and downs of this ride. Daymare 1994 Sandcastle is a prequel to Daymare 1998. And no, I haven't played that game. Yet. You play as Special Agent Dahlia Reyes, part of a special unit called the Hexacore Advanced Division for Extraction and Search, or Hades for short. If you're getting a little deja vu feeling with it being a parallel to Resident Evil Stars, then yes, you should be, because it's really like that and it's obvious. Granted, this seems to be a special government group that's sort of rogue, but not really. One of the things that is established early is that while the operation that you're performing is for the government, there are other groups within the government that seem to be against you or you have to deal with. It's a little bit confusing, and confusing in that sort of Resident Evil way where it sort of makes sense and yet it doesn't. Anyway, you, your mentor figure Foster, and your squad mate Roddick are sent into a military research base to extract a package of unknown contents. Later, you find out that this base is, of course, Area 51, and thus your team isn't exactly ready to face the horrors that actually face you in this base. The opening of the game starts slowly to build tension as you get little by little pieces of information as the world starts to build around you. Some people may call it slow, but it does a great job of putting you in the setting as you look around the CRT monitors and the surprisingly reasonable appropriate time cables to start to get your understanding of this world. Now, it'll feel like a lot of survival horror games that you've played before, of course, but there's a reason for that, the aforementioned tension. Don't break what obviously works. I will say early in the game, it doesn't do a great job establishing the experience of the team or their backstory. There's a weird rookie element being placed onto Reyes, despite early indications being that she seemingly worked with this team for a while. You'll start to let that slide, as it seems more coming from a place of caring and hoping she doesn't get hurt more than anything. Actually, come to think of it, there's an inconsistency in backstory telling that occurs throughout the game. One of the main plot points that develops is Reyes' connection and breaking of ties with her sister, which sort of comes out of left field, to be honest with you. After arriving, you'll find the base is basically screwed more than the Arizona Cardinals' chances this season. And you'll run across your first zombie. Well, sort of zombie? It's a resurrected corpse, which would qualify it, but it's distinctly electric in nature. They have speed, but seem to be focused on stopping you as opposed to eating your brains. And what follows is a fight for survival as you try to complete your mission while discovering the secrets of the base and what's truly going on. This, of course, leads to the gameplay, which is a third-person survival horror game. You start the game with an SMG and a shotgun, each of them having their own ammo and strengths. But the shotgun is the one that I found to be more reliable, having the stopping power and the damage that I wanted more than the SMG. Granted, you will need both weapons and will need to balance their ammo, because really, they are the only two guns you'll get in this game. That's right, only two, which I admit was a weird move when it came to the variety in the gameplay, and I do wonder if the game would have been served better with having at least one or two additional weapons. However, this may be because it's not the primary tool in your arsenal. Daymare's special addition to the formula is your Frost Grip, which you find pretty early in the game off a random soldier. Needless to say, if you ever wanted to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, aka Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, this game is sorta for you. I mean, I was basically doing this.
All right, everyone, chill. Chill.
Now, I know that I just praised the game for being period accurate and all, and a device that shoots out liquid nitrogen to freeze enemies seems to go against that. But given the fact that we're in Area 51 and dealing with aliens, I'm gonna let that slide. Regardless, this becomes the way you deal with the speediness of the zombies, freezing them. Hitting them at first will slow them little by little, and keeping the spray on them will eventually freeze them over, and you can tell they are in a truly frozen state, well, at least the main enemies you deal with the light leaving their eyes. At this point, you'll be able to smash them with a special attack, or do what I did most of the time and just shoot them in the head. The frost grip does recharge slowly on its own, so even in battle you'll be able to recover a tiny bit if you run around, and you do get additional charges if you pick up certain items to use like a quick filler. It's also the main source of progression in the game when it comes to upgrades, being able to freeze faster, have more freeze juice, or even new abilities like freeze mines and even a shield, which I never remembered I had to actually use. Control-wise, there is some clank to the controls when it comes to moving around, but this isn't a major step down from something like the Resident Evil 2 remake. Your aiming is accurate for the most part, with noted recoil from both guns that you'll need to adjust on your shots for second or third shots. Your ability to spin around to hit something to your side is reasonable, and I would say that for the most part, I could hit what I wanted to if I took my time to hit it, and hit it reasonably in time pressure situations, but not to the point where I was a Matrix-like FPS god. This, however, is where the game will start to get divisive for people, however. Some of the top reviews on Steam indicate the bizarre nature of the frost grip and focus on how fast enemies are. Now, let's be clear, enemies are fast. They are a little bit faster than you, but if you keep running, they will stop for their attack animation and won't be able to hit you if you keep running away from them. Sure, if you have multiple on your tail, yeah, that's going to be a problem. And turning around and hitting them with cold can be tricky, especially with the aforementioned multiple of them. It's tough, and it's exactly where I think the game needs to be, and in fact, is the biggest strength of the game. See, this is survival horror. One of the ways to be effective in survival horror is to have tension to every encounter that you come across, even if it's a single lone zombie. The freeze tool helps you deal with the speed element, but also means you have to be aware of your surroundings to slow them down, and isolate certain zombies or targets and focus on bigger threats. The game does a great job in the first half of pacing out the different encounters to keep you on edge. Every now and again, it'll throw one single zombie out of nowhere that caught me off guard, that I walked into a room and then all of a sudden I was attacked, and then kept me tense when the onslaught of 3 or 4 would follow.
Cool party.
I felt tension at every corner, and it felt earned. It's also the fact that resources, for the most part, are scarce enough that you'll never be comfortable in terms of ammo or health packs for about 90% of the game. You won't necessarily be starved of ammo-wise either. You'll be able to keep firing as long as you're not missing most of your shots. Now, health packs, on the other hand, aren't as abundant, as there were plenty of times when I went into a new fight with one hit to die, and died several times as I had to play perfect in that section, to the point where I would silently curse under my breath when entering a room, seeing a first aid kit model on the wall, but being unable to use it. Granted, that of course would change on another playthrough where I've learned more of the game's tricks, like how to kite zombies while reloading, or to be very sure not to run into hazards on the floor, as getting caught on something in this game is just asking for a game over screen. I liked how the game gave you outs when a zombie grabbed you, allowing you to freeze punch them off you when breaking it. In fact, there's a lot of things in this early game that I really enjoyed, and it actually made me feel like a young me playing in the first Resident Evil 2 again, which, I mean, accounts for a lot in the big picture. And why I mean the first Resident Evil is that first Resident Evil 2, not the remake, felt more survival horror to me. It felt like every piece of ammo that I came across was critical. I was really feeling every element. The more remake version, it has got survival horror elements, but there's definitely a little bit more action in terms of the actual gameplay. So seeing this and seeing their take on the formula, I mean, I was enjoying myself a lot in the first 3 hours, 3.5, 4 hours of the game. There's a reason why I went back to stream it more after the first one when I'm always covering new games. Well, that, and I know my fiance loves when I play horror games. So I would say for the first 4 hours of the game, I would have had a solid positive impression with little nitpicks here and there. And yeah, I would have recommended it to pretty much everyone, despite some of the weirdness of other elements of the game. Then the descent into madness happened. In this particular room, where everything fell off the rails, and not entirely in a specific positive or negative way, well, except for this room. This room can fuck right off.
Talk about your cold shoulder.
I spent over 1 hour and 30 minutes in this one room alone, failing time and time and time and time again. Keep in mind, the game's How Long to Beat page says that this game is about 6 hours. Up to this point, I maybe had, I don't know, 5 deaths? I want to say it was less, but let's just say it was 5. At the end of the game, I had 60 deaths. That's a shit ton. And yes, I know how I got a B at the end of the game is still confusing to a lot of people, myself included. But I feel like that was sort of expected given this room. So this room was responsible for 35 of those deaths. 58% of my overall deaths. Over half. People were watching me on stream and just listen to a couple of the clips that I have brought forth to you. Speak up at the most interesting of times. Oh God! No, not these people! Okay, no, I don't agree with that one. I wasn't anywhere near you. Damn it. Ow! Now, what made this room so horrible? Well, first of all, you have these enemies. They are called Sparkers, and can instant kill you if you get close enough. You have to shoot them in the heart region, and usually when that area is sort of open. So you have to hit your shots, but it shouldn't be too bad, right? Here, however, you start with one, who's breaking eggs that will unlock more of them. And don't think you can kill that first one without them getting at least another one of them out. There's too many spots that he can teleport and start unlocking them. There are points in this game where you can actually stop multiple enemies being spawned by killing the first enemy and taking out their little electric ball, but not here. And you'll have to deal with a few small zombies at the start as well. So okay, so now you have maybe 2 or 3 of them to deal with. But the room is pretty big, right? You should be able to dodge them. Although you may get overrun if you don't space manage and get yourself into a corner. The game has taught you how to deal with this up to this point, right? Well, here's where the game starts to really show its weaknesses, especially when it comes to certain attributes combining with one another. First of all, the game doesn't give a shit if you're in the spot where the monster is teleporting. You need to get out of the way, which in some cases would make sense. Except by the time you have noticed and started moving one way, the monster has teleported right on top of you. Which means situations like this. Really? 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 Really fucking really? In addition,
Because of their teleportation skills, you do not know necessarily where they are at all times. And you don't have a radar or any map indication of where they are. Hell, you don't have a map in this game at all. You have to use clues, like sound clues. The directional sound for the most part can be useful in this game. It did hint to me in other sections where monsters were teleporting to where I was running to. Except that doesn't apply to this room because there's this electric shit on the ground and it's constantly forcing a buzz, making it hard to hear if they're teleporting behind you, in front of you, exactly where. Which means you can't hear where those things are teleporting behind you, it gets muffled out and leads to even more death. Doesn't help that this room halves your normal freezing ability thanks to the electric nature of this room. But also, remember how I mentioned that the game was doing a great job of forcing scarcity in the survival horror element before, adding to its tension? That resources were scarce enough, and you had to make your shots count. So here I am during this section, making sure that I literally damage the enemy without wasting resources. I'm making every shot count and making sure that I don't do little damage when I could be doing big damage in terms of weaknesses. And that was extremely wrong in this case. I needed to pump as much lead as I possible, even if I was wasting it, before more enemies spawn, regardless of what the game had taught me up to this point. Which still doesn't make a lot of sense even after I figured it out, because I wasn't sure if I was truly doing damage in those cases. It was clear when I got the first or second shot off when they did the sort of stun animation, but those other ones, I wasn't exactly sure. This one room represents a weird point in the game, where it feels like the entire game changes in a weird way. Like, at this point, I would say the pacing of the game was pretty reasonable. The story had some good elements, and while there was some weirdness to them, and I'll get to them in a little bit, it felt very B-movie-ish, and I was willing to play along. But it's almost like at this point in the game, at this specific room, despite them probably working on all sections up to this point when it came to their timeline, that they started to run out of time, and started accelerating the QA and cycles when it came to playtesting and everything as a whole. Because the quality of certain aspects drop dramatically. Now, I know from my experience as a reviewer that when it comes to looking at the elements after that sort of frustrating room, I have to be careful about my own criticism. The fact is, I was charged. I was so angry and amped up that I could be starting to jump at shadows at certain things. But here's the thing. I'm not necessarily thinking I'm jumping at shadows at some of the criticisms I made after that. For example, I started to notice how muddy some of the presentation was, especially with rooms with the electric effects. Now look, the game isn't horrid when it comes to character models and environments. In fact, there's generally a good amount of details, and it was one of the things that surprised me in the early game. I was not expecting this from an indie game studio. It's not like that people aren't talented at all, but I actually was wondering if they had licensed the RE engine at certain points. Not that they were using it like the RE engine does, but the menus, some of the elements in terms of the textures and everything like that, they felt similar. Now, keep in mind, most of the footage was streaming footage, where I definitely knocked down the settings for streaming purposes. So keep that in mind when looking at this footage in terms of your own quality, assessment. I do like some of the weird architecture decisions that were made here too. It feels very government-like, we could have actually thought about this, but no, let's just put it down wherever. Like these giant stabilizing poles in the middle of a path. And you do see some good detail in the cutscenes when it comes to textures on the clothing of characters, if you're looking hard enough. Now, the corridors here and the idea of getting lost in a survival horror situation is good. You want the player to feel at unease and maybe get a little bit lost along the way. Not too lost where they're frustrated, but lost enough where they don't know what's around the corner. And even though there are big open areas, which usually means a bunch of enemies are coming,
you still felt confined with things like not having a map to guide you here. However, one of the nice things that modern versions of survival horror games have done is highlight the rooms and what items you may still be able to get from them, which one could argue is against the spirit of survival horror, giving the player a little bit too much in terms of information, but it usually serves more as a time saver. The fact is, you were probably going to search that room up and down, and you were going to waste time to find that one item you need, so just give them the information. Items in this game could sometimes be easily overlooked because they don't jump out at times, and especially with the fact that some places start to feel very samey and repetitive, which means you're spending time exploring everything in the environments. And there's definitely times where I missed things because it wasn't clear that there was an item or even something to grab. There were situations where I went back through an entire area just because I needed the health pack from it and ended up finding something that I missed the first time around. Sometimes it was in a place I didn't expect, but sometimes it was out in the literal open. Now look, when it comes to little details, when it comes to the overall presentation, it's hard for me to hold a lot against a smaller development team compared to someone like Capcom. And I want to make it clear that I still got a lot more than I expected from this game from a presentation standpoint, even with my nitpicks. Like, the directional sound that I mentioned earlier, I actually died even though I heard the sound coming from the way I was running because I didn't think the game would actually tell me that information and that the enemy would have spawned that far back in the rooms. Sound design in the game in general was reasonably positive, especially when it came to the important information, the reactable information. Hearing the frost grip go off, the heartbeat when things got hairy, the beeping of your freeze pack when you couldn't attack with it, all useful and all able to be heard reasonably if there wasn't a lot of interference. But there were moments of certain sounds, especially related to enemies and your own damage sounds, that didn't feel impactful like they should in that remaining 20%. Take a listen to some of the sounds I'm talking about, sometimes with my commentary, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. When it comes to the voice acting, however, I'm a bit more mixed, and especially in combination with the game's animations. Like our main protagonist, Reyes, gives a mostly good performance, along with several in the main cast. Some of the minor characters, they stand out like a bad sore thumb, like a scientist lady that is in the prison, and a lot of it has to do with the inflection of their voices, or their lack of it in certain situations. There are some lines that really end up sounding emotionless when they actually should have a lot of emotion, and it doesn't help that the animations at times felt stilted. Now, there's still good performances buried here, but take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about.
Whether they were playing nice at first, or maybe the whole thing was just a fucking trap.
Calm down. You can't stand. You'll have to wait here. We have the briefcase. We'll be out of here soon.
If we find Foster before Gore does. Whatever it is, it's a big deal. Foss talks about it like it's the holy fucking grail.
Jesus Christ, Roddick. Haven't you seen what's out there?
Yeah, I have.
I can't explain it. They seem to be animated by some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. The risk of these things getting out is too damn high.
You don't understand. That's not the point.
So tell me!
It's a long story. It all started in the 1950s, when U.S. Progress was running the Abyss scan program.
Okay.
Before you were born, we were already building your future.
You still don't understand.
Don't take another step.
Did you think I didn't know? You are not worthy to carry it. None of us are.
But you know what? I need to get back on track with that falling off the rails point that I was making earlier. Because again, before that specific room, I said that this game would have gotten a solid recommendation from me. And probably for a majority of audiences out there. And yes, I know I gave this game an 80, but hear me out. After that room, not only did the gameplay start to be a little bit more clunky and the presentation a little bit more inconsistent, it's the story and the gaps in it that start to really feel like sections of the game were cut out. Now, the game has about 6 hours in terms of completion, but let me give you an example. At one point in the story, an ally of yours goes to the residential area to look for a code to open the door, and actually runs across some survivors that he's trying to protect. Maybe. There ends up being a fire, and the enemies keep on coming, and what's interesting about this section, that it's not exactly certain if what the guy is reporting is 100% truthful. Up to this point, he's been a little bit out there, and it's suggested that the guy may have had PTSD. And I was really looking forward to see what happened in this section, what would transpire. Then you get there, and you go through the school a little bit, you see that, there was a little bit of damage, and it's like everything else that you've seen up to this point in terms of, yeah, everything seems to be screwed, but then you find him. He's on the floor, saying everyone is dead because of him. Now, there's a lot of damage around, but there's no bodies per se. And then you're walking back to the main area with, wait, what? Hold on a second. You're not going to ask him where they specifically died or push that a little bit? Or anything? You're not going to go search and maybe find some other survivor or evidence that maybe he's going crazy? No, we're just going to transition to the next scene and talk about it a little bit? What the fudge? And it doesn't get any better. But in a weird way, it also does. Now, yes, games like this can have supernatural elements. They can have elements that are out of this world. And obviously, with electric zombies, of course you're going to have that. But where the game takes a really weird twist in the third act, it just sort of goes out there, and then back in, and then back out. It almost gets to the level of a Spanish soap opera, where it's sort of absurd in how it tries to pull emotion. But at the same time, I can't say that it wasn't intriguing. It was very much like a NASCAR crash. I couldn't look away from it even though it had horrid parts to it. But there was a weird beauty to it as well. Now, look, if you're looking for, like, a cohesive story ending, this isn't for you. But if you like it where it goes off and you're just sitting there in awe wondering what the hell just happened, yeah, this game will be for you. Now, if you're expecting closure, good luck. Look, we're 34 minutes into this review at this point, and I do need to start wrapping it up. So, you may be confused that at the start of this review, I gave a solid buy score. And the fact is, the sort of falls apart in the third act, at least on the surface. But here's the thing that I kept on coming back to when looking over my notes and looking over everything I had criticisms over. It was fun and memorable. It wasn't like some of the horror games that I've played where it tries to emulate that element of Resident Evil or things like Dead Space, and it tries to be a little bit too serious or doesn't put the care into certain elements that I would expect. In this case, I do think that the developers really care about the genre, really care about the product they're putting out there. there was a lot of love for Resident Evil, for survival horror as a genre. There were references all over the place, from herbs that you came across on tables to obviously the Hades reference. But in terms of even the smaller elements of survival horror or horror in general, you could find those scattered throughout the game. And I actually really enjoyed finding those elements, being like, oh, hey, I recognize that, or, oh, that's a clever thing. Like the chips in the vending machine were all references to Resident Evil. Those little details make a difference in the overall picture, at least in my opinion. It shows that, yeah, they may have failed at certain elements, but those who are looking closely are going to appreciate the work that has gone into every element here. And yes, it may not all have worked, but I did enjoy it. I could say a lot of games that are solid 7s in other people's eyes that over the year or two, I would probably forget about. But this one will stick with me. I will be interested to see what the next game is from this developer. I will go back and play the not prequel, this was the prequel, the Daymare 1998, because it left an impression on me. Sure, the overall quality, it is hit and miss. And yes, I would like to see the game be a little bit cheaper than $30. But in the end, it still gets an 80 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. Now, that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. And as you can see, there are several in this case because it's going to be a divisive game. Needless to say, though, if you're a streamer, I would put a little bit more emphasis on this game, especially when it goes on sale, because I do think you'll get a lot out of it, especially with your audience, because, well, I don't have a lot of people who follow me on Twitch. I don't have a lot of people who watch my streams regularly, but those who were enjoying themselves, especially the part where I kept on dying. Anyway, that's it for this review. I know it took a while. I know that I usually want a review every 2 weeks, but unfortunately, this one was 3+. It happens. Real life, the whole job thing, and I just ran into a couple problems. Like, for example, I'm going to have to look for a new PS2 because of the fact that, well, the PS2 that I'm working with for the Time Splitters review, it works for Time Splitters most of the time. Then I tried to fix it for the other games, and now it doesn't work for a lot of them. Sometimes. So I'm still working on that Time Splitters review, but that will not be the next review. The next review will be the Everhood Eternal Edition. I was actually legitimately surprised that I was reached out for in terms of a review, because Everhood did reasonable, and the fact is that I'm a smaller creator, so seeing that, yeah, of course I wanted to actually review the original game. It was one of the games that was going to be on my wheel, and, well, this is a great chance. The Time Splitters review will be coming, well, when it comes, but until then, just remember that if you run into any electric zombies anywhere, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. That's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming. And now to put Vlad in the cage. Not again.